Mhm. Hello, good morning, YouTube folks. If you are there yet, post that, record that. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawk Fanatic Mailbag Podcast, the Hawk Fanatic Hotspot.
Mm.
I'll try this again. Welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot Podcast here on HawkFanatic.com. It's been a real crazy week. It is Friday,
Mm.
October 11th, 7:50 a.m. Central Time. I am Rob Howe. If you're on YouTube or podcast, the face or voice you're hearing opposite mine is Scott Docterman from The Athletic. You can see on YouTube he is in a hotel room in Nashville, covering the SEC Big Ten Summit there. Not a lot of people talking, but Scott will let us know who did talk and what they did have to say. He'll be back in Iowa City later today, obviously, for the Washington game tomorrow. We'll welcome him back to 90-degree weather here in Iowa City. And I don't know who's responsible for that, Scott, who controls the weather, but it's awful hot this time of year.
Well, it's since it's Iowa, it's got to be Kim Reynolds, right? She's the
Yeah, it could
governor.
be her.
Governors have that same flexibility and as the federal government. So yeah,
Yes. Weather patterns.
yeah.
We'll move on from that before we get in trouble here. Let's start, Scott, with where you are now and what you're doing now, because that's newsy and obviously has a lot to do with the future of the sport that we cover. You had mentioned to me before we started recording that the ADs were pretty mum, but I would assume that for the most part, but I would assume that the commissioners had at least something to say.
Most definitely. The commissioners were pretty good. I mean, they spoke for about 45 minutes to about, I don't know, I think there was about 8 or 9 of us in the room, something like that. But just to give you the lay of the land, earlier this year, like in February, the Big Ten and SEC agreed to form kind of a joint advisory committee to start talking about some of these issues. You know, the House settlement case, NIL, all those types of things that are really impacting college athletics, everybody, not just Iowa, not just Ohio State, but everybody. And the more they talked, they decided, you know what, we need to get in the same room and just kind of vent, commiserate, brainstorm, all those types of things. So they ended up scheduling this meeting in Nashville for this week, for Thursday, and every single AD from all 34 schools was there, plus upper levels of management at the conference level. And they spent about 6 or so hours probably hashing out a lot of things. There are things that are off limits. They can't talk specific, like money, for instance, when it comes to house or anything like that, because that's collusion. It's an antitrust violation. I mean, any of us old dudes who liked baseball in the 80s remember the collusion case with free agency. And so their counsels were very much committed. Don't go down any of these paths, and we're here, and if you start, then we'll stop you, type of thing, because Lord knows the colleges have gotten sued pretty badly lately. But along the lines, there were a lot of different topics, some of which are more inside baseball and some of which are more home runs. And I'll start with the inside baseball and get through it quick. But I don't know how many people have heard about like the private equity push. There's been a couple of different plans out there to kind of reform college football, infuse billions of dollars into the sport, reorganize it into one has them pretty much like a 80 team league with relegation for among the group of 5 teams, if possible, that sort of thing. And the other is probably more traditional, but there would be an isolation where it's just a Power 5 versus Power 5 game. I think people like that idea, and I think they like the money part of it, but they don't like the structure. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Big Ten and SEC are against that for a lot of reasons. One, they're all pretty well off. They make good money. Two, why should they have anybody tell them what to do when they are more powerful than the NCAA themselves? So don't expect a big private equity push into this sport. However, What Tony Petitti said specifically, and of course Greg Sankey said a little bit more directly, is that they have the capability to do all that themselves if they wanted to reorganize, or play each other more, cut out different games, all that kind of thing. And they're really fascinated with that idea of playing each other more. This year in football, they have 4 crossover regular season games, 3 of which generated more than 5 million viewers. They play, of course, a lot of bowl games against one another. I mean, Iowa seems to play an SEC team every year, and they played the Iowa-Tennessee game, for instance, 35-0, still had more than 6 million viewers. So 6 million people got to watch Deacon Hill play football last year. But I digress. But it also spills over into other sports, basketball, the potential end or revamp of MTEs, like the exempt tournaments. Instead of going to Cancun or going to the Bahamas or Cayman Islands, why don't you go to Orlando, and Iowa and Wisconsin will play Florida and Georgia, and play a 2-game classic there, because they're like, we're writing $100,000 checks for our team to go down there, and then we're not getting anything out of it. Money, we're not getting TV rights. We're signing everything away. Our product is signed away. So
it would be interesting to see if some of those exempt tournaments would then change their tune and start paying schools to come there, because that's really what should happen. Yeah. But sorry to interrupt. That was just a thought I had on basketball.
Oh, yeah, and you're right. I mean, and some do. It's kind of strange. Some, it's more the one-off neutral sites that pay. Like Iowa women are making like $450K this year.
Those are great.
Yeah. It's the ones where you go to the Cancun Challenge and battle for Atlantis and stuff like that, and Great Alaskan Shootout, and but and then there's others that, like somebody in Orlando, or there's just all kinds of different tournaments, and the leagues are looking at it going, duh. And I mean basketball was not the key discussion, but it was part of it, and so they're wondering, how do we play each other more? The ratings are good, the competition's great in those sports, so that and then of course they have a lot to navigate in the big picture. The college football playoff. And
I have one question for you on that. On that, with the 8 conference games in the SEC, 9 in the Big Ten, if you're telling the Big Ten you got to add an SEC team, it's a hell of a lot easier for the SEC, and advantageous for them than it is for the Big Ten in that structure.
Yeah, and in fact, I almost look at it as like, what's the Power 5 or Power 4 now? How many Power 4 teams do you play? And like in the Big Ten, I think it's 16 of the 18 play at least 10 right now. They play, Ohio State was an accident strictly that it didn't this year, just because it had a home and home set up with Washington. And then at the last, then they couldn't, and that was only done a year ago. So they really didn't have a chance to get anybody else. And then I think Indiana was the other one, and that didn't matter anyway. But then you look at, I think the SEC only has like 4 teams that do that play that many. Florida plays a lot, actually. They played Miami.
Most of them play 9, right?
Yeah.
They play the 8 conference and then one other Power 5.
Right. And so that, exactly. So, that's their side of the discussion, which Greg Sankey has really pushed for, going to 9. He believes in it, just like everybody else does. I mean, why wouldn't you want to play if you have this great conference, which they do? If you have these matchups, why would you rather see Mercer play Georgia, or would you rather see Georgia play Ole Miss? It's no brainer. Just
especially with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, you've got more teams. It makes even more sense to add another conference game.
Exactly. And they've been kind of held hostage to an extent by the lower tier schools that have said, that have worried about like bowl eligibility.
Yeah.
For instance, now this is where the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC come in and say, you know what, we're bigger than the bowls now. Before that wasn't the case. It was like an honor. Now it's just it's not even a privilege. It's just you qualify and you go. That they can tell the bowls, you know what, a 5-win team in the SEC or a 5-win team in the Big Ten is going to go to a bowl game. And what's the NCAA going to do? okay, go ahead. So
Yeah.
that's really, to me, I think what'll end up happening is something like that. And so that'll appease the Kentuckys, the Mississippi States, and the Arkansas that have kind of been on that, keep it at 8. But then that would extend it over to games, between the leagues. Now, I know what people locally will think. Well, what about Iowa State?
Now, I was going to ask you that because I got asked that.
Mm-hmm. And what it comes down to, it first of all, it's highly doubtful it'll be mandated. It's not like the Big Ten will say you have to do this or you're out of the league or anything like that.
Yeah.
But Iowa has the same setup as Oregon and Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they're not in the same leagues anymore, and in the SEC, you have Clemson, South Carolina, you have Louisville, Kentucky, you have Georgia Tech, you have Florida State. So those rivalries are really important to those fan bases too. So there's seven key members that are kind of like, all right, how we don't want to play 11 Power 5 opponents unless everybody plays 11. So, or do we have to cycle off or something like that? And that may be a possibility too, but it doesn't sound like that's the most likely scenario. They seem to be like, we understand we have stuff like that. So, but some schools still would want to do it, and that's where the playoff component comes in, and I'll get into that, and then we can scoot into something else. But the playoff, we've got 2 years of 12 teams. 5 top conference champions qualify. The 7 best at-large non-champions qualify. In 2 years, that whole structure will change. It's just a matter of how, and it could go to 14. It could stay at 12, and maybe it goes up to 16, but that hasn't really been part of the discussion.
So it's been discussed 14, the potential to go to 14.
14 has been a strong discussion.
Okay.
And so what the Big Ten and SEC have said, and this goes to the strength of schedule component, that our leagues are so strong that we believe that we deserve more automatic qualifiers, such as like 3 for each league are automatically put in there. And the discussion is, and probably rightly so, that 16 out of the 25 top 25 teams are from one of those 2 leagues. I think it's 9 and 7.
Well, they have friggin' 40 teams.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like the next league I think might be like 3 or something with the Big 12. And so the fear is that the Big Ten, let's say, all right, let's use this one. Iowa wins out. They go 10-2, don't get to the Big Ten championship by a technicality. Iowa State goes and wins the Big 12, and which is possible. And then, but Kansas State, or no, Utah, somebody else is like 11-2, and they get there and they lose to Iowa State. Well, then you got Iowa lined up against 10-2 versus 11-2. Take your pick from whatever university, Kansas State, and then then they don't get in, or even remove the provinciality of this. Let's say Penn State, they don't get in. They lose to Ohio State twice, and they don't get in. That's what the Big Ten is saying. Look, our league is so tough from top to bottom. And the SEC is saying the same thing, that we deserve those many teams. And of course the other leagues are balking at that. So
they are.
Right.
But what power do they have? I mean, they have some power, but they're not as powerful. So they kind of have to let those 2 leagues dictate what the landscape looks like.
Right. And earlier this year, the league signed a memo of understanding that enables them to, if they work together, nobody can veto them. So it's kind of like they're, on the UN Security Council type of thing. And it's those 2 against everybody else. And everybody knows that, if the Big Ten and SEC say, all right, fine, we're just going to do a playoff among each other. What are you going to do if you're in the other leagues? You're going to go, so what the likelihood is that they'll go to 4. My view is I'm probably stepping out here. It's not proven yet, but because the commissioner said, let's go through this tournament first and see it, and then we'll make our strong pitch for 2026 and beyond. my view is what'll happen is they'll go to 14 teams. Each league will get three. The ACC and the Big 12 each will get two guaranteed spots. The group of five will get one. That will put it, and then there will be what out of that,
three left.
Three spots left that could go to Notre Dame or any other at large. So then maybe it's five SEC, or maybe it's 4-4 or something like that. But that would be my guess is probably how it shakes out. Financially, they make more money out of the playoff. They pushed for that. And so they get, I think it's roughly like 21 million per school out of the playoff for each of those, where it's like 12 for the Big 12 and 13 for the ACC. So it's, they have owned this whole thing, and then they're moving it forward. The big thing, all the issues related to the House settlement, like roster limits and stuff like that, they really were focused on yesterday. But once all these things get solved, and then continuously improved, I wrote this today, they're going to own college sports in 2026 and beyond. So just kind of the lay of the land. That's kind of where things sat down here. It's remarkable that they're working together at all, because this was not a good relationship before Tony Petitti was there. And, there's some historical analogies I could use for this, whether it's, and the one that comes to mind, and believe me, is like Molotov von Ribbentrop from 1939, the non-aggression pact between Germany and Russia. But no, it's but that's probably a little extreme, but still, that these are the two most powerful entities in college sports, and they believe the NCAA is permanently broken and needs to be either completely done with or revamped to the point where it's unrecognizable from what it is right now. So that is another thing that will change pretty radically fairly soon.
Yeah, it's interesting, that structure change and the potential elimination of the NCAA, which I don't think would hurt a lot of people's feelings, but it also, you kind of look at monopoly standpoint from two such powerful leagues and what it means for the rest of the sport. We talked about the Big 12, the ACC seems to be weakening. So you wonder, we've talked about it before, these super conferences, what do we get to here? Is it just the two giant ones, and then it's not really even like a conference anymore? Because like you said, they take the top 80 teams and then they just break it up, and it's just whatever the structure is, hopefully they get to the point where it's the best for the sport, and it's not just a money grab and trying to go for the most money. Tough balancing act there. But we'll know soon. And the House settlement still, that's still hanging out there. Before they really need to get that fixed before they do anything else.
They were lucky that earlier this week on Monday that they were given preliminary approval from the judge to move over the settlement, because they tweaked a couple of things, and that the finalization comes in April, but they have to move forward with things like roster limits and scholarships and then the paying their athletes. The big question I know I've brought up several times that continues to linger is, are these payments going to be based on marketability of the athlete or on male-female student ratio? It seems like to me that the discussion is swirled towards marketability. There's going to be a lawsuit either way, and there probably should be a lawsuit either way, just to make sure it's fair and sustainable. But, I think it does make sense, because when you think about it, coaches are not paid equally. The women's tennis coach isn't paid the same as the football coach, or even men's and women's basketball, which you can make a case should be more equal, especially at a place like Iowa isn't equal. And so athletes are the same way. That why should a women's tennis player, women's track athlete get paid the same amount or offer the same amount as a male athlete? But that's probably something, again, that will be solved down the road. But I think for the sport and for the NCAA, you need to have an umbrella structure And, it just doesn't work. It doesn't, there's so much separation, because we hear it sometimes in Iowa about, oh, how's this going to help you and I? Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, Iowa had made like $160 million. You and I made 15. There's no world where those two things, that's like, Budweiser versus a craft brewery down the street. It's just not the same thing. And so, they need, whether there's an overall, structure for governance or for bylaws and for, administration, whatever, that's one thing, but the actual governing, they need to kind of reorganize that. I do think that's fair because the same rules don't apply. Do you think you and I is going to be able to pay $22 million to its athletes? They'll be lucky to pay 50 cents. I mean, out of their pocket. So, that to me is the thing that, is going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, just from a, an outside view, that the gap between the haves and have-nots is going to widen a lot, and you're going to see, like, maybe some of the lower group of five FCS schools that count on those, games against Iowa, UNI against Iowa, or Illinois State against Iowa, or South Dakota State against, they rely on that. And if those go away, that's going to be killer for those schools, at least, even if they're cut back quite a bit. And we saw that with the Big Ten. Remember, they made the rule where you can't play FCS. When was that?
That was in 16 and it ended in 17.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah. It was, and it was pie in the sky from Jim Delaney.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes sense. But what did it do? It escalated the cost of playing G5s, because if you're directional Michigan school, you're like, oh, well, Indiana can't play Indiana State anymore, so we're going to charge you $300,000 more to play us. And then in our part of the world, there are a lot more FCS teams who are actually better than a lot of the MAC teams. Why not? So that got thrown away. One concept, and I'm probably on my own limb for this, that I think would be fascinating, is if schools investigated playing a preseason game against maybe the FCS. So let's say Iowa would play Northern Iowa, make it easy, or whatever. And okay, they come to Kinnick, and instead of paying them $500K, you pay them $250K for a preseason game. It doesn't count on your record. Obviously, you could do whatever you want. It's like the kids' day practice type of thing.
Yeah.
But you charge people to come, and it's part of your season ticket package, and so it's like an NFL preseason game. And then they get some of their money. It's not a real game, and then during the regular season, if there was some sort of I don't know, mandate's the right way to do it, but okay, now we can play 11 games, because Iowa would get a home date out of that, probably make a couple $1 million. And then you could play 11 power conference opponents and then one group of five. Then I think you're heading in the right direction. And if the Big Ten and SEC can protect spots in the playoff, so that way, hey, our 9-3 team is really good. It just so happened that Penn State played Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia, but beat everybody else like a drum, that they're more valuable than the runner-up from the ACC or the Big 12. That to me, or the third best team or something like that. That, I think that would be good. And I think the fans would enjoy that, seeing better competition. I know a lot of coaches wouldn't, but I think that would be a step up in football.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, whether it's 12 teams or 14 teams, or, on the off chance it was 16 teams, you want the best teams in there. You don't want blowouts early in that, because you want, this is a new product that you're selling to the fans. You want it to be strong, especially out of the gate. So you start building on that and getting people into it. Oh, I'm 14 versus 1 or whatever, however they structure it. You don't want it to be, Georgia or Alabama against Kansas or something because Kansas gets in because it's a requirement that the Big 12 gets an extra team in there. And then boom, it's 50-0. And people are like, why am I watching this? I mean, some of it's out of your control, but you still want to get the top teams in there. And it's clear this year, only, half of the way into the season, that the Big Ten and the SEC are far superior to the other two Power Four conferences.
Right. You just look, I think 8 out of the top 9 teams are in those 2 leagues. Number 1 is Texas, and then 2, 3, 4 are Big Ten teams, 2 versus 3 tomorrow night. I mean, you have.
I mean, whoever wins the Big 12, it's not the same as when Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. Right.
It's just not.
It's a fun league. And it's very entertaining to watch. And I'm not saying that a team like a Utah or an Iowa State or, they're going to compete. And then if they get in the playoff, they've got a chance to compete well. And if like in this current system, that if Iowa State happens to win the Big 12, they're going to be, probably 3rd or 4th seed in a tournament. That's a major situation, a good one for them. I don't know that they would win it. I don't know any of those schools would win it. Hell, I don't think Iowa would ever win it. But, I do think that the depth of those leagues, it's a different, it's a different type of athlete. And now, and I know that the unfairness does come up that, now they're making more money, they're getting more teams. That means that more players are going to want to go there because they can do this. But that's the way it kind of was anyway.
Yep.
It's like when people start talking about paying well, they're going to go to Ohio State and Alabama like they never did before. And back when Jim Delaney actually allowed them to pay the full cost of attendance and give each player like $2,500 extra dollars. And people were saying, oh, this is going to kill the UNIs of the world. They're not going to be able to get the same money as Iowa and Iowa State. And I'm like, other than somebody with a parent coaching, there's never going to be a player who's going to pick UNI over Iowa State or Iowa. Maybe in basketball, maybe one. There was one.
Dad is an assistant coach.
Exactly. He's really, really good. But other than
there were 2 of them, right?
Yeah.
DeVries and AJ Green.
Yeah, exactly.
Drake and UNI.
Right.
But one's dad was the head coach, the other guy was the assistant coach. So yeah, you kind of get the connection there.
Yeah, but even like Doug McDermott, stuff. But went to Creighton.
It's a different structure too in basketball. Yeah. I mean, there are really good players in the NBA from small colleges, and there are in the NFL too. But the roster sizes are so much smaller and things like that. You can shine at a mid-major in basketball and be really good no matter what and make it to the league. It's harder to do that, I think, in football.
Yeah, for sure. And in basketball, in some of these towns, and see, I think I'm surprised Drake hasn't become like Creighton to some extent.
Yeah.
Because it's football's non-scholarship there, and it's a good market, and it's a great town, and I think people could. But when you have a competitive Iowa State and a competitive Iowa, it's hard to really shine in that environment. But basketball, you could splurge more on a player or two, and but that often doesn't last very long because they're really good at the mid-major level, then they're off to the high major level or the NBA.
Yeah, that's the thing too that we're dealing with in these sports is guys moving up. And women moving up from, low, mid, all the way to the top. So completely different landscape, as Scott has let us know here. It's going to be changing again here in the next couple of years. We'll probably have periodic meetings like this where, they take steps towards getting to that final decision on what the structure is going to be. And Scott will have a pulse on that. And as much, I guess we talked about almost a half hour on this, but if you want even more on that, go over to The Athletic, check out Scott's article on that, and follow him for more on these meetings and discussions and the future of college sports. Let's take a break. I think it's a good time to snap it here, and then we can come back and talk Iowa football and be a nice, neat break here. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disability and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. We'll hear from a few more sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side with Hawk Talk. Hang tight. And we're back on the Hotspot podcast. I'm not sure what Scott's doing on the
Square
YouTube.
dancing.
Oh, he's square dancing. Good segue.
Yes.
Switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal, like a good neighbor. State Farm is there. Hardcore Hawk fans gotta have a Kinnick Scoreboard Entertainment Center. Contact Fanatics Furniture at 319-750-0005 or KNICK 3615 at gmail.com. Scoreboard Entertainment Centers. Be hardcore. 319-750-0005 or KNICK 3615 at gmail.com. Home game this week, Scott. Folks, if you're looking for a place to eat, Black Angel Restaurant in Iowa City, Perez Brothers Tacos, El Banditos. If you frequented those former establishments here in Iowa City, you know the food is great and you won't be disappointed. Go check it out. Black Angel Restaurant here in Iowa City. All right, let's get into some Hawkeye discussion here, Scott. I think we can kind of enter the discussion this way. What's at stake? And I've been writing this in my previews each week because I think it's important, as we just discussed in the previous segment on the playoffs and the first year and trying to get used to this new system and what is the measuring stick for teams? Is it making the playoffs? Is it, for Iowa this year with the experience coming back, the playoffs were the goal. That was a reasonable and attainable goal, and it's still there. But after losing 35-7 at Ohio State, as Scott and I said last week, there were a couple scenarios here. You win the game, you're golden. You play competitively, that's a good thing on your resume when we get to what Scott was talking about in the previous segment. If Iowa can get to 10-2 and you're being compared to other teams that have 2 losses, well, they got their ass kicked at Ohio State. Another team played more competitively against one of the Blue Bloods or top 10 teams. So that hurt. The worst case scenario actually happened for Iowa at Ohio State when we were talking about it last week. Nothing you can do about that, though. Got to move forward. And the best thing you can do is get to 10-2. But it's out of their hands kind of in a way, Scott. I think if they would have played competitively at Ohio State, they would have at least had that and just that impression on people, that are like at the end of the day, they're like, okay, this team was right there with Ohio State, but it didn't happen.
This really comes down to the mistakes that were made in the third quarter. And, there are several plays that you can look back at. First of all, I'll say Iowa was roughly a 20-point underdog. Iowa was not going to win that game unless they played absolutely perfect, and Ohio State did not. Ohio State is clearly the best most talented team in the Big Ten. My opinion, the best team in the country. So maybe tomorrow night that'll prove me wrong. I don't know. But I will say Iowa had the opportunity to compete, to lose 21-7, let's say. And had that happened, we would probably be evaluating Iowa a little differently than we are today. And a lot of that comes down to, the most visible parts to me were the mistakes in the third quarter. 3 turnovers all led to 3 touchdowns. when you have a strip sack, kind of another strip sack-ish thing, and then you have an interception when you're driving for a touchdown, or driving to score. I think that really looks bad. And then you also go back into the midfield situation, 4th and 1, fake punt. Well, then timeout. Then I saw their linebackers come up to, and then, it's like, you got to be aggressive, man.
They made it easily. I don't care if the linebackers were coming up. You can say, Kirk Ferentz too conservative. This is what he does. This is, if you were surprised by that, you haven't been paying attention. My problem was, Scott, is so what? The linebackers are coming up. Trust your guys.
Yes.
Trust LeVar. They see something. If they think it's good, let them call it off if they don't see something they like. It was just not trusting your guys. And I think so much momentum there if you're able to convert that.
Right. And I know there are a lot of games when I agree with that philosophy.
Yep.
When they've played Wisconsin in the past, or even Michigan, where it's going to be this grinded out game and field position matters. But you're playing against a team that has an elite offense.
Well, you beat them 10-7?
Yeah. I mean, you're just going to play back and forth and kick a field goal to win at the end of the game. No, you need to take a leap of faith. You need to, and if you don't execute, you don't execute. So what?
20 yards, 30 yards. So Ohio State's not going to get that?
Yeah. I mean, they made it in chunks, and they looked good doing it. And probably the football gods wiped a booger on Kirk for that, because then, they decided to kick, we got a 22-yard punt or 28-yard punt out of it afterwards. And it was like, see, I told you, you need to go for it. And he admitted, well, maybe I was just a little too conservative. No, but there are times when that's fair, but not now. I mean, you got to go in aggressive.
Not against an offense like Ohio State, man.
Control it, be physical with it. They got a bad spot, I'll say that. And then they got a bad spot even after the review. So what? You got to make it happen. So, that was, to me, bad. And then, Cade didn't help his own cause. He looked numbers wise, 14-20. Oh, that's exactly what you want. 89 or 98 yards. That's not what you want. You need more yards there. And then 2 fumbles and an interception is absolutely the last thing you needed. And Ohio State won 35-7. And it's going to be tough for Iowa to now argue for a playoff spot, even if it wins out, because at 10-2, they'll say, yeah, how'd you fare against the teams that were decent? Well, now this team they play tomorrow, to me, looks decent. Nebraska could be very good. Who knows about the rest? But I think right now, you're probably outside looking in. Now, to flip it around, if you finish 8-1, you got a really good chance of getting back to Indianapolis. And so that's possible too. But you probably be playing the same team you did last week, and you probably have a similar result, or one like Michigan games and stuff. And people go, God, Iowa again. God, how did this happen? It's kind of like the Bills of the 90s, it's like, again. But then again, you can just, flip people off for that.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see, like, if Iowa were to finish 8-1 and make it to the Big Ten championship game, but you have an Oregon or a Penn State that maybe lost a tiebreaker against Iowa to get into that game, but have a better resume. Again, it's going to be fascinating to see how they separate these teams and choose 12. Well, not 12, but choose the at-large teams to make it to the first playoff. Very, very, very interesting. But as Scott said, the journey to 7-0 starts this week against Washington, a team I think that is better than people anticipated coming into the season. Not a huge surprise. Jed Fish, excellent resume. Guy's got a ton of experience. Flip things around in Tucson pretty quick. Good hire by Washington after losing their guy to Alabama. Will Rogers is a good quarterback, man. I mean, he's the all-time leading passing yards and touchdowns at Mississippi State. Yeah. So guy's a good, capable quarterback. 12 touchdowns, 1 interception this year, I think, something to that effect. So, yeah, they're good. The one thing I I did notice in doing my preview, Scott, penalties.
Mhm.
Washington, a lot of penalties. Iowa, been very good. Isn't Iowa number one in the country in least penalties? They got to be up there.
Yeah. They've had very few, other than the opener when Kirk wasn't there. It was like they all decided to, get wild,
Yeah.
have a wild hair in their butt. But yeah, Iowa's number one in penalties. So it's been another remarkable year on that front. And turnover margin, they're better this year than they've been in the past. Will Rogers is an outstanding quarterback, as you said. Played for Mike Leach before Mike Leach passed, and it was kind of interesting how he ended up at Washington because Kalen DeBoer was still there at that time when he committed, and then he left, and then he went in the portal. Then he decided to stay. Jed Fish asked him to stay. I mean, this whole team is a really fascinating look at college football because they did qualify for the national championship game last year. A really good team. They're 14-1. And then Kalen DeBoer leaves. They had like 10 NFL draft picks, some outstanding players. They all
Two starters back?
one or two. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy to
Yeah.
think about.
And he brought, like 12 players who were going to Arizona who were really good.
Running
Jonah,
back is that running
Jonah
back
Coleman is
really good.
Yeah, two of the better. We're going to say this a lot this year, but two of the better running backs in the country are in this game.
Because one's always going to be in the game
Yeah,
when Iowa plays.
Yeah, exactly. One's definitely going to be in there every year. Well, one of the fascinating things I looked at with this, I didn't have a whole lot of time to study it as much as I usually do, but Will Rogers between the hashes is as good as I've ever seen. He is, and this is numbers according to PFF. So he's
Is this just this season, Scott, or is this
just this season at Washington? Well, yeah, and he is across the board too. But at Washington alone this year, he's 87-102 between the hashes for an 85.3% completion percentage. So that's RPO based. This is exactly what you want in Iowa's offense, which is fake. Even though a lot of times he's under center now that he wasn't before, but fake, throw across the middle, fake, throw the middle, throw short, anything around the linebacker area. So that's going to be fascinating to see how Iowa tries to work that. I think this is where a YA Black is really important. Get your hands up. Yep. Jay Higgins, can you get another interception? It's like every week you're causing a turnover. So, Jonah Coleman, fantastic running back. He averages 6.7 yards per carry. So that's 600 yards. Not as much as Caleb Johnson, but still pretty good. So this is an outstanding matchup.
Good receivers too, right? Two really good receivers, at least.
Yeah. They have two of them that have almost 500 yards apiece this year. One has 8 touchdowns. So, I don't
think the Iowa receivers have had 8 touchdowns this decade.
Jacob Gill has 1 this year. So I think Reese Vanderzee had 2 in his own in the
He's got 2. Yep, they got 3 this year. I think.
Yeah, so that's because they have 3 touchdowns. Can you believe that we're already to the midpoint and there have been no tight end touchdowns yet?
Australia has 1, doesn't he?
Does he? Oh yeah, he does from Brendan Sullivan. You're right.
Yep.
Okay, my bad.
But your point is still stands.
No.
It's
they have
not a lot of throws in the end zone again.
Yeah. But they are, the funny part is, Rob, that they're actually Iowa is averaging more points per game than Washington is, and they if Brian Ferentz was the OC, they would be leading the drive for 325 right now. They're at 27 points per game. So. But Denzel Boston, 8 touchdowns, almost 500 yards, 35 catches, and Giles Jackson is 38 catches, 479, and a couple touchdowns. So they're averaging almost 80 yards receiving per game. But they're not real good in the red zone, and they're not real good with penalties. And as we've known this Iowa defense for going on half of our lives, it's bend but don't break, and when you get in the 20s, they make things really tough. And I can see a whole lot of yards and a lot of less points, if that's a good phrase.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if Washington buys into what other Big Ten teams know, and that is you have to take what Iowa gives you. If you try to force the issue, if you try to be overly aggressive, that's when you get beat by the Doughboys. That's when they
Yeah.
pick your ass off and then help their offense, which is going to struggle to go 75 or 80
Yeah.
yards down the field for a touchdown. Now you're giving them 40 yards or 50 yards to go down the field. So that's big. I did also notice, Scott, their kicker, 9 of 15, and I believe he's like 2 of 7 beyond 40 yards. So something to keep an eye on there, too, if it's a close game.
Yeah, for sure. And now this is a team where, as much as people have been upset, irrationally so at some extent, but imagine that, but upset about Iowa's passing game, this is probably not the game where it shines. I mean, so far they're number one in the country in team passing efficiency defense and third in passing yards allowed. But they're also 58th against the run. And that's where Iowa is strong. They're going to try to fortify that. I expect Iowa to get loose on that. They're going to have to, they're going to have to connect on some passes. I mean, it's just not feasible in today's world to try to do otherwise. But I would expect this to be primarily a run-heavy game for the Hawkeyes. And whereas, turnovers, fumbles have been an issue for them a little bit, and so have penalties and red zone and kicking. So this to me is, they might move from the 25 to Iowa's 25, but then they're going to miss the field goal.
Yeah,
and
this is definitely a game where Iowa can have a big advantage in ground acquisition and kind of just grind this thing out.
Yeah,
exactly. You don't want to get in a track meet with this team. You'd rather make them play physical football.
Right. It's going to be more about, again, disruption up front than sacks. He's got a good quick release. He's a good quarterback. I mean,
doesn't run.
No, doesn't run. Which is good for Iowa. But
where he's going to be.
Yeah, but you just get your hands up, push him around, make him move a little bit, and make him uncomfortable. Maybe you'll get a sack later in the game, but this is just a really good matchup to open the day. One of the best days. I was talking to one Big Ten official yesterday, and he was pumped. He's like, "We've got 4 Rose Bowl rematches back to back to back to back. You got Iowa, Washington. You've got Penn State, USC. You got Oregon, Ohio State, and then you close it out with UCLA, Minnesota." And it's like, this is what it's about, And that's, you think about it. Wow, those are the 4 Pac-12 teams that came in, and they're playing against some, fairly traditional Big Ten teams. So, but this one to me is a good curtain raiser. It could be very competitive down to the wire, and dare I say, maybe not even boring.
Yep, should be a good environment. Iowa hasn't been home since September 14th, so I'm sure the fans will be juiced up. Even though it's an early kick, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to make sure that it's a lively environment in there. Couple other things I wanted to get to, Scott, before we get out of here. Number one is a lot of talk about the quarterback situation this week. Should a change be made? Should Brendan Sullivan play more? Cade was pretty outspoken this week in terms of him feeling like he's getting better. Kirk, same thing. They feel like he's getting better. Again, you shared the numbers from Ohio State. Efficient, but not effective. And we need to get to effective, and we're going to the 6th game of the season, halfway through the season, and we're still here, and it's still an offense you don't feel, at least I don't feel, is capable of winning a game yet.
Yeah, not the passing game. The run game I think is close, but and this is where it's weird for me, and I hate feeling like this, where I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I can see progress in the passing game. It's just not happening quick enough. Well, Kirk plays the long game, which is get better and better incrementally, and then by the end of the year, you're a pretty good team. And I can definitely see that being the case here. They've got to be better on defense too. They have not played to their level of football on defense. Not, probably not in the last 5 years. I mean, this may be the worst that they've played, and it's not bad, but it's just not great. And
what is it, do you think? Not to go too deep into it, just kind of kind of a cliff notes of what you're seeing on that side of the ball that's not going well.
I will say this. I think last week they were just beaten by a better team.
Yeah, that one is,
That
and they played
schematically,
well in the first half. You hold
yeah,
Ohio State to 7.5 points.
right.
That's not bad.
They had a couple of, I mean, they're
Two
three,
turnovers.
yep, their three best players made three big plays. When you had, Jay Higgins made a play that's going to hopefully be on a lot of NFL draft highlights, to be able to make the tackle, punch the ball out, and recover it in space.
He's turning into Josie Jewell.
Yes, that's a great comparison. I
Same
think he is
smaller, undersized guy. NFL is going to be like, nope, not big enough.
Yeah,
but somebody's going to say, Baltimore's going to say, nope, he can play for us.
Yeah, fourth round guy, and he'll be in the league just like Josie's still in the league, still starting. He got hurt the other day, but yeah, no, you're exactly right. He's not Jack Campbell. Jack's different.
Yeah, he's Adonis.
Yeah, but exactly. 6'5", 250, can run like. He's a tight end playing linebacker with a Marlboro Man mentality, but but Jay is definitely like Josie, except for their personalities are completely different. As opposite as you could ever get. Yes. Strong, stoic Josie, and Jay will say whatever he wants to say, and it's God bless him for it. But the other two, Sebastian Castro had a nice interception, and he's a really good player, and sometimes has been put in rough situations. And then Y.A. Black made money, lots of it. Serious dough the other day. I mean, that fourth down stop where he pushed back a top 50 player, Donovan Jackson, into the backfield, tripped up the running back, and then everybody else cleaned it up for him for a fourth down stop. Y.A., if he's the type of guy that won't get a lot of, like I may argue that he deserves All-American mention. And people will be like, well, he only had, one sack and blah, blah. Yeah. The NFL guys will say, no, we want that guy. He plug and play. He'll play for us for 10 years. But I think defensively, what my biggest fear all along has been not enough pressure applied from the edge. I don't think that's there. Secondary is making weird mistakes. The long pass was, to me, when it broke for Iowa, the long pass to Jeremiah Smith, who is a freak, an incredible athlete. But it was like, Jamar Harris, what are you doing? You've got him. Quinn was able to go over and get a tackle. It was a nice play by him, but he was like sagging with him. And then he was kind of jogging. And then Smith, just hits the gas, and he's just still kind of jogging and letting him go. And I'm like, you're too good of a player to let that play happen. I'm not saying that he can't catch the ball, because this guy's, in 3 years is going to be, a first or second pick overall. But I think the secondary has to get better, and I think it needs to be more consistent, and pass rush.
Yeah, it's the combination of those two for me. It seems like the other quarterbacks are getting a lot more time to throw the ball, and with as good as the athletes are in this league, that's a dangerous way to go.
And I know I mentioned it before, but I wonder, is there a backer, or is there somebody, that isn't playing, and I'm legitimately picking up rocks and going, maybe this will work. But on pass rusher, Kenny Merriweather, a Cam Buffington, Derek Weisskopf, somebody who, you're going to be our stand-up edge rusher on third and long, and just use your speed to try to get underneath the tackle, or loop and stunt and stuff, but just somebody with some sort of speed to get up the field on 8 plays a game, just to shake things up, because I think that they've got some really good, tenacious defensive linemen, like Ethan Herkett and Deontay Craig, fit that bill. I think Max Llewellyn and Brian Allen are more athletic and more ascending, but they're not quite there yet. But I just think infusing some sort of speed, is going to be critical. Even if they go to a 3-2-6 or something like that, where they just have or 3-3-5, and then they just have a backer that can blitz, on the average of 4 plays per half.
That's the thing that I think I'm with you. I think you can maybe work in some of those young guys and just say, hey, pin your ears back, get the quarterback, and then also send Castro on a blitz.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send Jackson on a blitz. Higgins. Those guys are all really good football players and athletes. And I think if you pick the right spots, those guys will be real effective. Jack Campbell was when they sent him. So it can happen.
He's pretty good for the Lions doing that too. So. But the other thing, and this is schematic, and I've kind of questioned it a little bit, and that is, they've gone back and forth so often between 4-3 and 3-4 that at times I'm like, you guys just need to stick to one of them, 4-2-5, because I think what I saw last week was that there was this like, okay, we send in. We take off Xavier and bring in Kyler Fisher and back and forth. And I understand you want to have some sub packages. And I, again, talking out both sides of my mouth, Norm Parker never did it and it cost him. But I think here they're overdoing it a little bit. I guess I'm thinking you got a 5-star safety in Xavier Wampa, who has been inconsistent. And a lot of that inconsistency to me is he hasn't been on the field to see everything play after play after play. And I think I want to see more of him. And no offense to Kyler Fisher, but he got caught once on Emeka Abuka. And I'm like, that is not a matchup you can win ever. This is a first-round draft pick at wide receiver next year. And Kyler, who hopefully gets a chance in a training camp next year. Good athlete, but, passing downs, if you want to replace Jackson with him, okay, I got it. But I would just back off. Maybe then this week will probably be one of those weeks, although they do run the ball well with Coleman.
Yeah, should be an interesting matchup there. The other thing, I wanted to get your thoughts on the end of LaShawn Williams and Caleb Brown's careers at Iowa. Both, if you missed it, announced they would be entering the portal this week in December. So sitting out the rest of the season. Brown, one catch for 18 yards. Williams was hurt and hasn't played much this year as well. So two things here. Your thoughts on that, and then your thoughts on Kirk's comments, which were eye-opening, I think, or eyebrow-raising, because you don't hear him say that very much when it comes to players.
Yeah.
You could definitely tell there was an irritation there.
Right. I look, take them individually, because I think, other than the fact that they're from Chicago, that there's really not much there. Caleb Brown was an incredible disappointment. And there's really no other way to put it. Not only his performance on the field, but what we thought he could add, and he never did. That could be coaching. That could be just his performance. That could be everything. The fact is, he was a 4-star guy who went to Ohio State that Iowa was able to lure and pay to come to Iowa, and he didn't perform on the field. He didn't hardly get on the field until late in the year. Then he was their best performer, but that was kind of like being, it wasn't like he was tearing it up. He was just happening to catch a couple of passes, and it's looked good at the moment. This year, nothing. Absolutely nothing you got from him. In fact, in the Minnesota game, he was wide open and ran the wrong route, and that would have been a touchdown if he would have ran the right route. And they couldn't trust him. Unfortunate. Wish him the best. I have no problem with him, but LaShawn is a different category.
It's just wide receiver again, man. That's the part.
Yeah.
Any other position, and I'm not blaming anybody for it. It's just, God, can we get off this ride?
the obscene attrition at that position.
Yeah, it's just
and it doesn't matter if they're transfers or they're because you got the Charlie Jones and the Oliver Martins and Matt Corrals.
Deontay Vines, he could have helped this year. Goes to Old Dominion.
Yeah,
just weird stuff. Jacob Bostic.
Yeah,
doesn't play here. Goes to Texas A&M. I don't know what the hell he's doing there.
I haven't even looked, but yeah, it's.
But it's bizarro. The wide receiver position here is just bizarro world.
It's like I say this. It's like the 40-year-old man who looks like he could be in the greatest health and looks like Brad Pitt at age 40, and all of a sudden has cholesterol off the charts.
Yeah. That's
Iowa. It's like developer of tight ends, any defensive player, offensive line for the most part. Great wide receiver, what? And got, from what, I kept the numbers. I need to keep updating them, unfortunately. But, since 2012, they've had 24 scholarship freshman receivers, and only 5 have lasted through their whole career at that position. That's, that's disgusting.
Yeah, that just can't happen if you're going to have success. I mean, it's impossible to establish anything, to have a foundation when that's happening.
And then, for a while there, it's like, but you're not really missing anything. Well, you are now.
Yeah.
You're missing something significantly, because when Tyrone Tracy runs for 129 yards for the New York Giants last week because they moved him a running back. And I know people were like, well, Iowa wanted to move him to running back. Well, yeah, Iowa wanted to move him to running back. They didn't do it. But you know what they did instead? They played him an X, which is not the position for him.
And the reason they did that? Attrition at receiver.
Yeah. And
they needed him there.
They felt like it.
Yeah.
And they didn't say, well, you know what? Let's move him to a slot. Let's move him to Z. Let's get him to move without the ball and get the ball to him while he's moving. No, let's say you have to win the one-on-one matchup and beat that, boundary defender, and it never worked. Charlie Jones. I mean, so you look at some of those issues and you just go, God, what is wrong with this place? Now the other one, LaShawn Williams. I feel this one kind of sucks. It's part of the business. There should be zero hard feelings by anybody with this. But here's a guy who has been injured. This is his final year, and is only behind maybe a first team All-American. So when you look at those factors, okay, he's let's take that, and say it's understandable that he wants to redshirt. He needs another year because he wants to play in the NFL. He's too old to be messing around. This one, to me, I wonder, and I don't know enough underneath the surface, but I wonder if can he redshirt and come back to Iowa? Does he have to enter the portal? This would be a guy that next year, would you like to see him and Jazz Patterson together? I would. I think he'd be good there. He didn't lose a step from last year. He's built up significant equity in the program. He was the offensive MVP last year. He was honorable mention all Big Ten. But, I don't know, again, what the discussions have been like. And, but that would be a wish that I would have. Now, if he goes somewhere else and tears it up, good on him. I wish him nothing but the best. He's the type of guy, in other words, I would love to see walk out on senior day. I think he deserves that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a great point. I think just the running back reps, like last year, it was definitely a timeshare. Whereas this year, one guy has emerged as we haven't had that really in a while. We haven't had a Caleb Johnson bell cow back around here. It's been a timeshare for the most part. LaShawn was hurt. So I think he was wondering, when I get healthy, am I going to be back into this rotation? Yeah. And now there aren't any carries there. It makes sense. I get it. We thought this may happen in the offseason, Scott, with how crowded this room was. So not a huge surprise. Now, just like you said, just kind of disappointing because I really like LaShawn as a human, as a person.
Right.
And I think the team, I think Iowa does too. I think, as you said, he's built up that equity, has a ton of respect from the coaches and his teammates. So, and I would, and just to circle back to Kirk's comments that you're not losing much, I would say at a program like Iowa, where depth is usually a concern compared to the Blue Bloods and some of the upper level programs, you don't want to lose quality depth. And you can separate these two and say Caleb Brown and LaShawn Williams are different cases, and they very much are. But if you just look at both of them from a talent standpoint, that can help your team, especially if, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if Caleb were to get hurt, or if Reese Vanderzee gets hurt, or Caden Weechin gets hurt, and maybe it kicks in for Caleb Brown. Maybe he does start to figure things out and get the new route tree down.
Yeah.
At any rate, it's over. Those guys are gone. Iowa moves on, and we should move on to our picks so we can get Scott to the airport.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. I don't want to have to.
Washington, Iowa pick during this segment.
Yeah, it was. If I have to go to if I have to fly myself, my arms are going to be really tired. Well, last week we again those close.
I know.
Really,
I didn't. I don't write them down, but in my head, I'm thinking, man, that like before we started recording the Nebraska friggin' Rutgers game.
Yep. Exactly. You know, you
we
have
called it.
Yep, exactly. We called it. It's like we should almost be rewarded for, you know, kind of like I thought that this 12 was going to beat that 5, but I still picked the 5 anyway in the NCAA tournament. That's kind of where we were with that.
Yep.
So, but we got a tie because it was a push, but we both thought it would be a push, and it was. The two that went, you know, we picked two the same. And then we picked two different, and one was you went with Oregon over Michigan State, and that was it was 23.5, and I think it ended up like 24 or something. I can't remember.
It was close.
Man. Yeah, it was close. And then the other one was you went with Michigan, I went with Washington. So, but yeah, I
remember that one.
We both lost Iowa, which was the time was -18, and of course it ended up minus 10 points more, and. Pick 6 or UCLA. We both picked Penn State -27.5, and Penn State pulled within 27-11. So did not win the point spread on that. But anyway, overall, I was 5.
They call it gambling.
Yeah. You are now overall 33-1, and I am 39-27-1. So I went 5-2, 3-4. So tonight, we have probably the weakest game of the it's not even close. It is the weakest game of the week. Maryland -10 at Northwestern on a Friday night in Evanston, Illinois. Do you have
I think Maryland's better, but this is a tricky spot for them. I'm going to take the points here, just a hunch. I think, like I said, I think Maryland's better, but night road game Friday night, a weird stadium on the on the lake. Right. I'm going to take the home team.
Same here. It wouldn't shock me at all if they won. Northwestern wins. I think this is one of those 26-20, and it could be an overtime game, you know, just kind of something weird like that.
Maryland's one of those teams that you doubt, then they suck you back in, and then you go with them, and it blows up in your face.
Yeah, I know.
They're just one of those teams.
Yeah, they are. But at least they're one of those teams and not one of the ones that they're 3-9 every year. They have improved and they are better than what they when I thought they were. All right, we'll come to ours later. Wisconsin at Rutgers, and the number that I wrote down from 2 days ago was -2.5 for Rutgers at home. I'm going to go with the upset, and I'm going to give me 2.5 points. But you know, what that really means is give me Wisconsin to win by upset.
I'll go with the Scarlet Knights in this one. I'm still not there with Wisconsin. Again, this is more. If this was in Madison, I'd probably pick Wisconsin. I think it's a 2.5 tells you it's kind of a toss-up game. Yeah. So, and got to go with the Jersey team when given the opportunity.
Yeah. Here's a fascinating one to me. Purdue at Illinois. Illinois -19. But you know what? It's deserving. I'm going with the mighty Illini because Purdue is a bad team.
Now, these are kind of sneaky rivals because of the geographic proximity. If you've been to both,
it's a protected rivalry now.
Yeah, it's one of the more underrated series, I think, just in terms of weird stuff that happens.
Yeah.
So makes it tough to pick. I'm going to take the points.
Okay, you're going to take Purdue?
Yep.
All right. Purdue. All right. At 3:30 on CBS, or 2:30 our time on CBS, Pennsylvania State -5 at USC. I am going to take the Trojans and take the points. I have a feeling that the runway fiasco and Penn State College, they're among the next step in things. I could see Miller Moss having a nice week for the Trojans.
Man, James Franklin complains a lot about shit, man. God,
Every
for everything that guy has, he has a lot of complaints. I'm with you. I'm going to take the Trojans here. I think it's a bounce back game for them at home. Uh, a long trip for Penn State. Had to travel all the way to where they have to go to Harrisburg to
oh,
fly out of. Yeah,
oh,
poor Penn State.
oh.
I will not only pick USC, I'll be rooting for them to win.
I hear you. Yeah, I mean, they had to bus in a whole hour. God, to get on a bigger plane. The horror, the tragedy.
Yeah, poor
Oh,
James.
come on, donors. Ante up for a longer runway for the airport. Oh, brother. All right. The biggest game of the week for any of the games, the Ohio State University, -3 at Oregon. I saw enough last week. I'm going with Ohio State. Throw the
Yeah,
points.
me too. I don't feel great about it. I don't know if I would bet money on it because I think this is just a really hard game to handicap because of where it is. More than anything, I think if it's in
Mm-hmm.
Columbus, I think it's Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
I feel a lot more comfortable, but I think they're the better team, and it's only 3 points, so that
Yeah.
that leads me to the Bucks.
Yeah, I like their line of scrimmage a lot. I
Hmm.
mean, that's the only two times I've seen Iowa get really beat up line of scrimmage wise was in 22 when Michigan came to Kinnick. I thought that they kind of owned the line of scrimmage, and it was a competitive game, but I thought they were just a better line of scrimmage team. And then last week, I just thought, okay, this is a pretty
Ohio
good.
State has had some teams that have struggled to get a consistent run.
Yeah,
When I saw how they ran on Iowa early in that game, and granted, I mean the backs are freaking NFL
yeah.
backs, but it was the line that was
Mm-hmm.
opening up some big holes.
Yep. And what they did was they used Iowa against it. Every time Iowa would go to like a 4-2-5, they would run, and then every time Iowa went 4-3, they would pass. And credit Chip Kelly and everything else. So, two more games here. Minnesota -5 at UCLA, and I'm going to go with the Fighting PJ Flex and give up the 5.
Yeah, that's too low of a number to take UCLA. Not a
Yeah.
good football team. I'll take Minnesota.
Minnesota playing in the Rose Bowl. Who would have believed it?
They finally made it
They finally made
back.
it. They made it to the Rose Bowl for the first time since 1962. They might have had a game back in the 70s or something, but I don't know. Like against UCLA or something. But finally, the game that we were at, and correct me if the number is wrong. I had Iowa -2.5. Is
It's
that
pretty
still?
much stayed there the whole. I think it opened or was close to
Yeah.
opening at that, and it's pretty much stuck there. So good number
Yeah.
by the odds makers.
Yeah. I'm going with the Hawkeyes. There's a lot of reasons for this. I think it's going to be a really good, fun, competitive game. I think it's going to come down to the end in some ways, you know, Washington's down 23-19 and has the ball at the Iowa 20 with inside the final seconds. And then there's an interception and, just something like that. I can see this just being down to the wire. And, coming east, playing at 9 a.m. on their body clock against a physical team in a hostile environment. I'm going to go with Iowa, but I'm excited to see this. I think it's going to be a fun game.
Agree with you. I think Washington makes too many mistakes to win a game like this on the road, penalties, turnovers, things like that. And like you said, 9 a.m. on the body clock,
Right.
hostile environment, traveling halfway across the country. And I've been to this movie
Yeah.
so many times over the years of Iowa looking terrible one week,
Mm-hmm.
circling the wagons,
Mm-hmm.
coming back the next week and getting it done. And I see that being the case this week.
Yeah.
I think they're going to run the football pretty well.
Yeah, I do too. This is, there are a lot of things that we can and we have, chided Kirk for in different ways, but I still give the Hall of Fame coaches credit on this. When their backs against the wall and they're facing adverse situations, I don't think there's a better coach in the country than him. Time after time after time, they, as you said, circle the wagons. They put the one that's will forever stand out to me was being in Penn State in 16 and watching that massacre. And then the very next week playing number 2 Michigan, which by the way, I picked that game, Michigan 41-0. And then Iowa wins, a palindrome 14, to 13 and
Yeah.
stuff. So it's just, it's just, I'll put it this way. I'll be surprised if they don't A, play well, and B, win. So
Yep. I'm with you. I think this is a bounce back game, 11 a.m. On Fox. It's the big noon kickoff, even though it's 11 o'clock here. Don't let that
yeah.
It's big noon East.
Yeah.
Everything revolves around the East Coast. Damn
Yeah.
East Coast bias. But yeah, 11 a.m. Kinnick Stadium. Have fun, everybody. Going to be a warmer day tomorrow, which would be interesting too if that impacts players at this point of the season. But we'll see. Look forward to it. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the time with your family and friends. And Scott and I'll be back to talk to you. You going anywhere next week, or we're going to be back on Thursday?
As of right now, I'm staying put next week until probably Friday. And then I think I might be heading to a couple of games next week, but that hasn't been completely finalized yet. So
we will let you guys know. I remember this week that tweeted out on Wednesday that we're going Friday. So any changes, we will let you know. But we'll be back next week at some point on the Hotspot podcast. So please be back. Thank you to our sponsors. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you.